The transport aircraft banked sharply, its engines screaming against the thin night air. The fuselage groaned under the strain, vibrating with every violent gust of wind. Inside,
Ephosa gripped his rifle straps until his knuckles turned white, his body locked against the sway of the plane. Beside him, Marley's breathing was ragged. His boots tapped a frantic, uneven rhythm against the metal floor.
Echoing through the cramped cargo bay, Ephosa leaned over, his eyes fixed on the man next to him. He pressed his palm firmly against Marley's shoulder. The tapping stopped instantly. Marley looked up, his jaw set tight, and gave a sharp, shaky nod. The cabin lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows over rows of grim-faced soldiers. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the relentless roar of the turbines. Ephosa looked toward the rear of the plane, watching the heavy metal door. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to stretch and recede with the plane's erratic movement. He tightened his grip on his rifle once more, felt the cold steel against his palms, and braced himself. The descent was steep, and the air inside the cabin grew heavy, thick with the smell of fuel and recycled oxygen. They were coming down. The ramp groaned, mechanical teeth grinding before it hit the concrete with a heavy thud. The transition was absolute. The cold, recycled air of the cabin vanished, replaced instantly by a wall of heat that hit the lungs like a physical blow. It was dry, thick, and tasted of pulverized stone. Ephosa stepped out, his eyes squinting against the sheer force of the light. The sun reflected off the vast expanse of the tarmac, turning the world into a blinding white glare. Dunes shimmered on the horizon, distorted by the rising heat haze. The air carried a fine, abrasive grit that coated the skin and clung to the back of the throat. He moved forward, his boots heavy on the solid ground, the transition from the roar of the engines to the open, searing stillness jarring his senses. Beside him, the rest of the unit pushed out into the glare. No one spoke. The heat felt heavy, a tangible weight pressing down on shoulders and necks. They formed into a line, the desert stretching out in every direction, a vast and unforgiving landscape. They marched ahead, leaving the aircraft behind, stepping deeper into the furnace of the dunes. The next 3 weeks blurred into a cycle of sweat and fine sand. Ephosa spent his days hunched over topographical maps in the command tent. He smoothed the paper flat against the table, the edges curling in the dry heat.
With a grease pencil, he traced the lines of supply routes. He worked in silence,
his eyes darting across the contours and elevations. He memorized every bridge span and every potential ambush point hidden in the valleys. He did not look up when others entered or left. The map was his entire world. He marked a red X where the road narrowed, then pivoted to a secondary route, calculating the distance between points with a precise, calloused finger. He studied the topography until the lines were burned into his mind, visualizing the road ahead as a series of tactical challenges. When he was not at the table, he was in the motor pool, his hands stained dark with grease as he checked the suspension and armor plating of his transport truck, ensuring every bolt was tightened against the coming strain. He was preparing for the invisible dangers of the dunes, leaving nothing to chance. He knew the terrain, and he knew his role. He remained focused, ignoring the rising heat and the exhaustion of the others, his mind entirely occupied by the logistics of survival. The sun was a white-hot weight that pushed down on the camp, turning the sand into a reflective oven. Marley worked beside the transport truck, but his movements had lost their precision. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red, and his hands trembled as he gripped the wooden crates. He reached for a heavy box of ammunition, his fingers slick with sweat. He hauled it toward the rack,
but his footing failed on the loose sand. The crate slipped. It tumbled, corners biting into the air, heading straight for his boots.
Ephosa moved before the sound of the impact could register. He stepped into the gap, bracing his back against the weight of the box,
catching it inches from the ground. The wood groaned under the pressure. Ephosa shoved the crate into the rack with a violent, controlled heave and turned to face his comrade.
Marley leaned against the truck, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. Ephosa reached into his pack,
Pulled out a canteen, and pressed it firmly into Marley's hand. "Drink," Ephosa commanded, his voice cutting through the heavy, stagnant air. "Stay focused. The horizon is moving, and we have to be ready. This heat is not an excuse to let your guard down. Keep your eyes on the work, not the sun."
The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert in a bruise-colored twilight. The air lost its blistering bite,
replaced by a sudden, creeping chill that seeped through the canvas of the tents. Men huddled around small,
temporary heating units, their conversations dying out as the commander walked into the center of the camp. He held a rolled map of the border, his posture rigid. He did not call for silence. It followed him naturally. He stopped near the main supply rack and unrolled the document against the side of a transport vehicle. The paper crinkled loudly in the gusting wind. "We cross at dawn," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of ceremony, cutting through the noise of the desert night. The unit moved as one. Men stood up from their gear, the sound of equipment clattering against metal ringing out across the perimeter. The routine of the past weeks vanished in an instant. The reality of the mission took hold, pressing down on the camp with the weight of impending action. Ephosa watched the commander trace a line across the paper with a steady finger. There was no more waiting. The boundary between training and combat had dissolved. Every soldier checked his sidearm, tightened his webbing, and looked toward the eastern horizon, where the darkness seemed to thicken in anticipation of the morning light. 4 a.m. The desert air was brittle, biting at exposed skin. Ephosa climbed into the driver's seat of the transport truck, his movements practiced and devoid of hesitation. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles tight. He checked the side mirror, then the center mirror, ensuring the view of the line behind him was clear. He pulled the chin strap of his helmet taut, feeling the familiar snap against his jaw. Outside, the convoy was a series of hulking, motionless silhouettes against the pale, pre-dawn sky. He reached for the ignition. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. A deep, rhythmic vibration surged through the metal frame of the vehicle, traveling through the seat and into his core. The sound dominated the clearing, shattering the remaining silence of the night. He shifted into gear, the metal linkage clunking with heavy finality. Ahead, the lead vehicle's lights cut 2 white beams into the darkness. The line began to crawl forward. Ephosa kept his eyes fixed on the taillights of the truck in front, his foot hovering over the pedal. The machine was ready. The mission had begun. The border was not a gate or a fence. It was a line in the sand that vanished the moment they crossed it. The terrain shifted instantly. The flat, predictable dunes gave way to jagged, broken earth that clawed at the tires of the transport trucks. Every bump in the road sent a violent jolt through the steering column, forcing Ephosa to fight for control of the heavy vehicle. The landscape here felt different. It was stripped, scarred by heat and impact. Then, the first wreckage appeared. A car, reduced to a blackened, hollowed-out shell, sat skewed across the shoulder. It was a tombstone of twisted metal, stripped of color and purpose. Then another appeared, and another. They lined the road like sentinels of a forgotten war. Each hulk was a warning, a physical testament to the danger that lay buried in the dust. The air inside the cab grew heavy, with the smell of scorched rubber and stale oil. Ephosa navigated the convoy past these iron remnants, his grip on the wheel firm. The desert had stopped being a vast expanse and had become a gauntlet of debris. Every turn revealed more of the jagged wasteland, pulling them deeper into the hostile, unforgiving territory. The road ahead was a nightmare of geometry. Sharp rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, threatening to puncture tires with every rotation.
Ephosa kept his foot hovering inches above the pedal,
ready to slam it down or kill the momentum in a heartbeat. His eyes darted across the debris-strewn horizon. A pile of twisted metal lay to his left, casting a long, jagged shadow that seemed to shift as he passed.
He squinted, his breath held tight in his chest. Was it a trap? A buried charge?
He eased his foot off the gas, the engine note dropping to a low, guttural thrum. The silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic grinding of suspension over gravel. He scanned the ridges, his neck muscles aching from the strain. Every dust devil swirling in the distance triggered a spike of adrenaline. He was not just driving. He was hunting for the invisible pulse of the enemy. The air grew thick,
stagnant and heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. He gripped the wheel until his palms were slick.
He would not blink. He would not miss the glint of steel or the disturbed pattern of the sand. The road was a living threat, and he was the only thing keeping the convoy from falling into its maw. The convoy shuddered to a halt as the sun dipped behind the jagged horizon. Ephosa killed the engine.
The sudden silence was jarring, replaced only by the rhythmic ticking of the cooling metal beneath the hood.
He jumped from the cab, his boots crunching into the parched, sun-baked earth. He walked the perimeter of the truck, his eyes scanning the dark, shifting ridges of the desert floor for any sign of movement. A senior NCO emerged from the gathering shadows, his pace measured, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He stopped beside the truck, his gaze lingering on the topographical maps pinned to the metal door. The NCO traced a finger over the marked supply lines before looking at Ephosa. "You have a steady hand," the NCO stated,
his voice low and devoid of pretense. Most men freeze when they see the road ahead.
They lose their nerve at the first sight of the wreckage. Ephosa did not turn to face him. He kept his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon, his posture rigid and alert. "I am not here to freeze," Ephosa replied. The NCO nodded once, a brief acknowledgement of a soldier who had proven his worth. The desert wind picked up, swirling grit against the truck, but Ephosa stood motionless, his focus never wavering from the path they had yet to travel. Ephosa walked back to his cot, the canvas walls of the tent flapping violently in the rising wind. He pulled a small, crumpled notepad from his pack and uncapped his pen. The light was dim,
forcing him to lean close to the paper. He began to write, his hand moving in slow, deliberate strokes.
He did not write of the burned-out husks or the potential traps that haunted the road. He wrote of the stars. He described their clarity in the dry desert air, the way they blanketed the dunes in a cold, shimmering light that made the world feel quiet and still. He folded the paper, sealed the envelope with a firm press of his thumb, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his vest. The physical act of sealing the letter felt like closing a door on his own anxiety. He laid his head down, the grit of the desert still clinging to his skin. He did not remove his boots. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the grip of his rifle, pulling it tight against his side. Outside, the wind howled, whipping sand against the tent fabric with a constant, abrasive hiss. Ephosa stared into the darkness, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He was ready for the morning.